everybody, welcome back to Crafting and Crying Daily. I'm Rebecca, your host, and yes, I am a mess today because I get up, get dressed, go outside, and the wind is like whoosh, it's Kansas. So we're having a windy day today. So I wanted to show you before we get in, we got a lot to get to today, yes. This is a show where I recap live trials, and sometimes things do not get to trial. And we're going to talk about one of those cases that's not going to go to trial. And that's the case against Ruby Frankie, the mom influencer. They call her Momfluencer. She used to have a YouTube channel and called 8 Passengers. That was taken down, by the way, so don't go look for it. So she entered a plea yesterday. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get to the case of the 2 Colorado firefighter paramedics. They both took the stand in their own defense. Now, they didn't have to. You have the right to remain silent. But they decided, nope, we want you to hear what we have to say, jury. First, let me show you what I've been working on. And I'm almost done. So you'll see here, this is the 3 gnomes. This is a gift from my sisters a few years back. And last year I started it. I did all the border stuff last year. So I've got gnome number 1 done, part of gnome number 2, and then I've turned it around and I'm working on gnome number 3. I got the top hat done. Now we're working on like his nose and his brim of the hat. So right here where you see my watercolor release papers, this is my artwork. And it's available at craftswithcrashley.com. She sells release papers with my artwork on them. So that's what I'm working on. So stinking cute. I know. And Christmas is 6 days away. On the 6th day of Christmas, my true love gifted me partridge in the pear tree. I'm just trying to, I got so much stuff here, guys. Oh my gosh. All right. Let's start with Ruby Frankie. So she has apparently had a lot of time behind bars to reflect on what she has done. And she decided to enter a guilty plea. She had 6 charges pending for aggravated child abuse. She pled guilty to 4 of the 6 charges. The other 2 charges were dropped. And this is in exchange for consecutive prison terms on each of the 4 charges. Not concurrent, consecutive. And it'll be up to the judge how many years. It could be anywhere from 1 year to 15 years on each of the 4 charges. So up to 60 years in jail she's looking at. In exchange, she's going to testify for the state against her business partner, Jody Hildebrandt. And I suspect probably going to place a lot of the blame on Jody Hildebrandt. And I just have to make this comment. I mean, I don't know what it is about Utah, and I don't want to say Utah, everybody in Utah, but this Mormon religion where they have these offshoots with these crazy ideas like, I don't know. We saw it in the Lori Bell Daybell trial. We're going to see it in the Chad Daybell trial. Now we see with this Ruby Frankie and this Jody Hildebrandt, and they get to come up with these crazy ideas in the name of religion, and I just don't get it. But so she entered the plea. Now here's what she said. She admitted to, and I'm going to read it because I didn't memorize it. And this is according to NPR. Between May 22nd through August 30th, so it's a roughly 3-month period of time, over the summer months of 2023, she admits that she forced her son, RF. Now, RF at the time was 12 years old. Or he's 12 years old now, and I don't know, 11 or 12-year-old son, forcing him into hours of physical tasks, summer work outdoors without adequate water, and repeated and serious sunburns that blistered. Like, she would send these 2 kids, because there's 2 involved in these charges. She has way more kids than that. But She would send them outside with no shoes on and make them stand there in the sun for hours. The daughter, she would make her run up and down the road in this heat in August. I mean, my God. And I know last year during those months here in Kansas, it got to 110, 115 degrees on some days. So, yeah, those poor kids. So RF was denied food or given very plain meals like chicken and rice. I kind of enjoy chicken and rice, but you still have to add some little spices to it. And he was isolated from other people without access to books, notebooks, or electronics. After he tried to run away in July, his hands and feet were regularly bound, sometimes with handcuffs. At times, ropes were used to tie together handcuffs that secured his hands and feet as he lay on his stomach, lifting his arms and legs off the ground and injuring his wrists and ankles. That is so disgusting. Who even thinks of this stuff? What what lesson is she trying to teach him there? So, here's the lesson. He was told that everything that was being done to him were acts of love. She admitted to kicking her son while wearing boots, holding his head underwater, and smothering his mouth and nose with her hands. She similarly abused her 9-year-old daughter, EF. They're not naming them because they're minors, of course. And she was repeatedly told she was evil and possessed. The punishments were necessary for her to be obedient and repent, and these things were being done to her in order to help her. The girl was convinced that what her mother said was true. So not only was she charged with bodily injury of these two kids, that was two of the charges. Bodily injury to RF, bodily injury to EF. She was also charged with mental anguish that resulted from that bodily injury to RF and EF. So that's the 4 charges. So disgusting. I'm glad we didn't have to sit through a trial because um, it's just disgusting. Like I said, it's disgusting. Um, but she is due in court on February 20th. She will return to court for her sentencing. Now, between now and then, she can withdraw her plea if she chooses to. And then on December 27th, which is next Wednesday, Jody Hildebrandt is due in court for a pretrial hearing. So will this force her into taking a plea? Because now you've got this star witness, Ruby Franke, is going to testify against you. What are you going to do, Jody? And the charges that Ruby pled to was for inflicting those things that I talked about and for allowing another adult to inflict those punishments. And that referring to Jody Hildebrandt. Now, I understand that the father had separated from Ruby, been separated from her for over a year. So, and he claims not to have knowledge of any of this. Sad, very sad. All right, so let's talk about the firefighter paramedics on trial in Colorado. This all has to do with the death of Elijah McClean, 23-year-old Elijah McClean, who he goes to the store late night in late August, 70 something degrees. He goes to the Shell convenience store. He's wearing a long sleeve jacket and a ski mask. So somebody called it in and said, "Hey, this is kind of suspect. This looks kind of weird. He's not doing anything wrong, but did you go check it out?" So apparently, because I had originally said they should probably drive by. That's what they should have done. And apparently that's what they did. They did drive by. So originally they drive by him, and when they drive by him, he waves at them with his hands. And that's when they stop and approach him. So yesterday, so this tussle ensues, and three police officers take him down to the ground. At one point, they say, "Oh, he went for my gun," and they're doing chokeholds, and this guy is just not cooperating. He's just not doing what they're asking him to do. Stay calm. They just wanted to ask him some questions, and he's like, I don't know. So they get on the radio and they ask for the paramedics to respond for a medical assist. So they're responding. They don't know what they're responding to. So those two officers, the three police officers, were charged. Two of them were found not guilty of reckless homicide. One was found guilty and has not been sentenced yet. So now this is the trial of the two firefighter paramedics for the administration and overdosing of Elijah McClean with ketamine, because once they gave him the ketamine as part of their excited delirium, agitated patient protocol. And they waited for him to calm down. He's still being restrained by officers. Um, Once he calms down after a couple of minutes, the officers take the handcuffs off. They put him in soft restraints, put him on the stretcher, and get him into the ambulance. As they're putting him into the ambulance, he stops breathing. His heart rate stops. And, you know, fast forward several days, and he is brain dead. And his family chooses to donate his organs and then end life support on his behalf. So the two firefighter paramedics took the stand yesterday. Officer Cooper and Captain Chuniak. So apparently these guys are still working. They have not stopped working. Captain Chuniak, he was a lieutenant at the time. He is now a captain. Same station too. And he took the stand, and the judge took, he when he found out the guy was going to testify, he excused the jury, said, "I'm going to send you back to the jury room for a few minutes, and it'll just take a few seconds." So once the jury was gone, he went through that whole liturgy that they go through. You have the right to remain silent. Are you on anything? Did anybody force you to do this? That whole thing. And he said, no, I want to testify on my behalf. So they bring the jury back in, and he gets on the stand. Now he tells the jury that he has been an officer, or he's been a firefighter paramedic since March of 2006. He became a captain in October of 2020. This incident occurred in 2019. At the time, he was a lieutenant. And he explained, I'm not a firefighter. I just know what they do on Chicago Fire, because that's the only firefighter show I've ever watched. But he explained that he is the lieutenant for the rig, the engine. He said there's an engine and there's a truck, and so I guess there's a lieutenant for the engine and a lieutenant for the crew of the truck. I guess he said so. He had 4 people under him per shift, or 3 people per shift. There was 4 of them per shift, but he had to make sure there was coverage 24/7. So, but he was the lieutenant for the engine. Yeah. Then there was a captain that's in charge of all of it. Yeah. So he explained that that night he was monitoring the police dispatch. He says, I do that occasionally. The guys, it was late. It was after 10:30. He says, the guys will go up and go get in their bunks and try to get some rest, and I try not to bother them, but I'm usually monitoring, doing paperwork and monitoring the police dispatch. And if I'll hear calls, and if I think it's something we're going to need to respond to, we'll get up and we'll start getting ready to go, or we'll get up and head that direction. So he had heard this call on the police dispatch, and but he didn't think anything of it. He didn't think, oh, they're not going to need us for this, But all of a sudden, their tone goes off. There's different tones for the different rigs, I guess. So they heard the engine tone. So his crew who were up in their bunkers, gets up and gets down on the engine, and they all have different, he's a lieutenant, so he sits in the passenger seat, and then the guy that's driving is the engineer, and that night there was an acting engineer covering for somebody else who had the day off, and then the other two guys are in the back, and Cooper was one of the guys in the back. He's the paramedic out of the four of them. Now, Chuniak is a paramedic, but his job that night was to be the lieutenant, and he said he's responsible for the safety of his crew and for navigating them getting there, and they all have like these little jobs. And then I'm not trying to make light of it, I just think it's interesting. So Cooper actually explained that, he couldn't see where they were going because their seats face backwards. So he says, I can see where we've been, but I can't see where we're going. I thought that was interesting. So they knew that they were responding to a police department request for medical assist. That is all they knew. And but Chuniak knew, because he had been listening to the police that night, that this was a guy who the police had done a pass by him, and he was waving their hands, and he was dressed in a ski mask with a long sleeve jacket. He knew all that. When he got to the scene, he was asked during his direct examination, did you know where the ambulance was coming from? No, they did not. And he talked about how the ambulance is owned by Falk, F-A-L-K. It's dispatched at the same time, but they don't run on the same radio, so he can't hear where they're coming from. They're not dispatched by the same person, but he can talk to them on the radio. So after he gets to the scene, they all had their jobs that they were going to do, and the paramedic Cooper, his job once he got out of the rig was to go up and assess the situation, and the lieutenant did that as well, but from a different perspective. His perspective was, where's this ambulance? Like, and how is this ambulance going to park here? Because there was a very heavy police presence blocking the entrance. And by the time they found out about it, it was too late to turn the truck around. It would have taken them several minutes to turn the truck around and go a different direction to get closer to the scene. So they decided just to park as close as they could get and walk to the scene. So what he sees when he walks up is the officers struggling with Mr. McClean. And he said it was more of a struggle than he had ever seen in his career. That's just how he described it. He saw one officer pick up Elijah McClean and body slam him to the ground. And it was immediately prior to this that Chuniak said he saw Cooper trying to, starting to kneel down to do an assessment of him. And as he started to kneel down, they pick him up and body slam him. And then Cooper, during his testimony, and I'm kind of blending these two together, Cooper said at that point, he was so stunned that they had done that. And he didn't want it to happen again. He just kind of backed off. And Cooper could see that he was diaphoretic. Now, they both testified to this. He was diaphoretic, which means he was very sweaty. He was breathing fast, and they presumed that his heart rate was up because, he's struggling. So, of course, your heart rate's going to be up. And both of them talked about how actually Chuniak said he couldn't make out anything that was being said. He didn't hear him say anything. I don't think he was close enough. But Cooper said he was talking, but it wasn't like full sentences. He just wasn't making any sense. And then Cooper talked about how this apartment building that they were in front of is apparently government owned, and the government houses people from other countries in this apartment, which is why he asked, does he speak English? Because he said he wasn't making any sense. and he wasn't sure if it was a language that he wasn't familiar with or, what was going on. So he tried to stand, Cooper tried to stand at the head of the patient. Meanwhile, Chuniak sees that, there's a struggle going on, and neither of them, both of these officers deny ever knowing that there was um, a carotid hold. They never heard this. They denied ever knowing that he went unconscious. Chuniak said he knew that the guy had vomited because he stepped in it. He saw it. He stepped in it to see what it was. He saw that it was vomit. So he was aware that Elijah McClean had vomited. But their concern was, this is excited delirium, and excited delirium is a medical emergency. Therefore, we've got to get this guy some ketamine as soon as possible, or his heart is going to stop, because that's what happens with this excited delirium. Their heart is just racing, and eventually it just stops. So he's looking, and he can't see the reflection of an ambulance coming from anywhere. So he gets onto the radio and he says to the ambulance, are you coming emergently? And what's your ETA? And they tell him they were 2 minutes out. So he directs them of which way they should come to get closest to the scene. And he tells them that they're going to need ketamine and soft restraints and the pram, which is also known as the gurney. This is the first time I've ever heard of it called a pram, but apparently that's what it's called. I always called it a stretcher. Gurney, stretcher. I think they're all interchangeable. So at some point he has a conversation with Cooper, the paramedic, and they're both paramedics, but I'm saying Cooper was the paramedic because he was the one that was in charge of giving the medical care that night. He was directing everything medical wise, and he had said to Chuniak, we are going to need narcs and soft restraints. And Chuniak says to him, narcs or ketamine. And Cooper explained the reason he said narcs is because the ketamine is part of the narcotic box that the ambulance has. But, anyway. So Chuniak recalled that once the ambulance got there, the female ambulance EMT, she gets out with this stretcher. She comes over near where he is, and they're waiting for the ketamine. And he kept thinking, well, gosh, it's taken him a long time to draw up ketamine. And Chuniak is the one that told the paramedic on the ambulance 500 of ketamine. Draw up 500 of ketamine. So finally, he's about to go find out what's taking this guy so long when he sees him coming. And he goes over to Cooper, and Chuniak can see him and Cooper conversing. Now, what Cooper says is they were talking about is the 5 rights. Cooper was showing him the vial, showing him the syringe, showing him the expiration date, showing him how much was in there, and then Cooper gave the medication in the shoulder, the deltoid. Then they waited for him to calm down. So Chuniak takes his place at the head of the pram because Cooper has asked him to manage the guy's airway. And Chuniak says that at the point, there's no point where this guy isn't being restrained by at least 3 police officers. But at all times that he observed Elijah McClean, he was still breathing. And after the ketamine, there was a minute or 2 pass where he stopped struggling. So that's when Cooper said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to wait for him to calm down, and then we're going to take off the handcuffs, and then we're going to put him on the pram. Well, police were not having that. They're like, nope, we'll take the handcuffs off after he's on the pram. So Chuniak could see as they were putting him on the pram and taking the handcuffs off and putting restraints on that his mouth was full of fluid. saliva, vomit, whatever you wanted. So he said, we're going to need suctioning. So he starts, as soon as he gets into the ambulance, he's starting to suction the guy, and he puts in an airway. It's just a little thing that keeps your airway open. It's not the intubation. But he notices once he's done that the guy's not breathing. And then he tells people, let's check for the pulse. He can't find a pulse. Nobody else can find a pulse. They start CPR. So he intubates him. That's where they put the tube down into his lungs. And they continue CPR and get to the hospital. And CPR continued even all the way there and into the hospital. Now, one of the things he had said was that this guy is not our patient until he's out of handcuffs. So the prosecution said, well, then why did you give him ketamine when he was in the handcuffs if he's not your patient? So then he had to kind of backtrack. Well, yeah, and then his defense attorney on recross or redirect said, even though he had the ketamine administered, you guys were not in control of this, what's going on with this guy. No, we weren't not in control until we got him on the pram. At that point, we were in control, and he was our patient. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, Cooper, he's been with the fire department for 21 years. So these are not like young guys. They're not like fresh out of school or anything. They've been doing this a long time. Although Chuniak said this was his first experience with ketamine. I'm just trying to read through my notes. I think I've covered everything that they talked about. He did say that, because he did back off after the body slam because he just didn't want that behavior repeated. And there was something that really, really offended him. And he just didn't want it to happen again. So he just thought, let me not make this situation worse. But he was eyeing him, and he was making sure that his chest was rising and falling. So that was his testimony. And I felt like, even though I could not see I don't know what either one of these guys look like up close, except I can see them in the thumbnail of the video. But I can't assess their credibility other than what I'm hearing. And, they both went with the explanation of the weight. The way Cooper described it was, I weighed at the time 250. So I'm comparing this guy to what I weigh. And I'm estimating that he's maybe 50 pounds lighter than I am. So, so I went with 500. And he said there was a 300 range, 400 range, 500 range that it kind of all went by. No, that wasn't part of the formal training, but it was sort of an informal conversation that was had while we were training. And that's the way we would do it. We would estimate, is this a small guy? We're going to give him 300. If it's a medium guy, we're going to give 400. If he's a large guy, we're going to give him 500. So that's how they determined how much to give him. 500. All right, that's the show for today. I'm very curious what this paramedic firefighter expert has to say. She is from Memphis, Tennessee, Black female, and I'm very curious. She calls it ambulance. I worked on the ambulance. So we'll see what she has to say. I will see you guys tomorrow in Crochet and Crime Daily. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.